Welcome to the seminar with the AUC World Bank seminar. We're all very pleased to be here, for you to be here. We're pleased to have you. We'd like to thank and welcome the World Bank team. You'll get to sort of know them individually as they contribute to the discussion today. And we'll assume that I think people will be coming in within the coming 10-15 minutes. More people will be coming in. So we'll start the seminar by asking Dr. Ahmed Dallal to come to the podium to actually say a few welcoming remarks. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Ramadan. In the last few days, we've been having lots of activities and events on COP, and I'm really delighted that we are. I mean, that is every day there is more that we're learning. There is every day even more work that's being done, and I'm glad about this. Today, of course, distinguished World Bank team members, esteemed colleagues, dear AUC community, good afternoon or soon good evening, and welcome to the World Bank AUC Seminar on Climate and Development, in which the World Bank will present the MENA Climate Roadmap, followed by a panel discussion of two areas of focus from this roadmap, with contribution from World Bank and AUC panelists. For years, the American University in Cairo, and please forgive me if you heard me say this before, you know, it's inevitable that I will repeat myself a little bit, but please bear with me for those who've heard me talk about this subject before. For years, the American University in Cairo has been committed to issue the environmental sustainability, to issues of environmental sustainability in its research, teaching, student activities, as well as campus operations. This commitment is well aligned with national, with regional, and international priorities. Our university-wide climate change initiative, which is, of course, orchestrated by Dean Atam Ramadan, and there is a large number of members of our community who are participating to this initiative. This initiative, while it was officially launched in June 2022, encompasses activities and enterprises going years back on environmental sustainability, on sustainable development goals, water issues, waste management, public health, renewable energy. And this work solidly rests on collaborations with national and international partners. Today's event is an example of one such collaboration with a key player, the World Bank, in climate action. The initiative also paves the way for further and continued exchanges between AUC and the World Bank on climate change and climate action priorities. The MENA Climate Change Roadmap provides guidance on key challenges that MENA countries, including Egypt, are to address while moving steadily forward with their ambitious development plans. The priority areas of the roadmap align well with AUC activities on environmental and climate action, and therefore represent opportunities for collaboration, further opportunities for collaboration. Today's panel discussion focuses on two critical issues in relation to climate change: water and food security on the one hand, and climate smart cities on the other. Activities at AUC address these issues through a number of projects. AUC's leading Center for Applied Research on the Environment and Sustainability CARES is addressing problems in the field of water management, offering real solutions on the water, food, and energy nexus, and addressing water conservation and recycling, renewable energy, food security, sustainable farming, waste management, and more, many more. AUC is also planning for a greener campus expansion, as well as contributions to sustainable urban development and planning, making good use of interests, experiences, and expertise available at the Departments of Architecture and the Department of Construction Engineering. And smart cities will be a central focus of our intended School of Design, Architecture, and Urban Studies, and hopefully we will be able to make very significant contributions both to the higher education landscape and to issues related to sustainable cities, which are, of course, important for the whole world, but certainly important for Egypt.
Sustainable Development, and the Global Director of the World Bank's Climate Change Team. Dr. Hammer leads on the bank's engagement on climate change issues with the United Nations, the G7, and the G20 and other development partners. He previously served as the bank's manager for climate change and climate change issues, working extensively in Vietnam, Ethiopia, Romania, and Egypt. Between 2005 and 2013, he taught full-time at MIT and Columbia University. Dr. Hammer holds a PhD from the London School of Economics, an MPP from Harvard University, and a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Davis. So we welcome Dr. Hammer, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an esteemed faculty to the president of the university. Let me just begin by speaking on behalf of the World Bank team and say how excited we are to be engaging with you today on a topic that's so crucial to the well-being of not just Egypt, but the entire world, climate change. As was mentioned, I was a professor of urban planning at MIT until 2013. And as an academic, I'm a firm believer of the academic community's integral role in tackling pressing development issues like climate change. Currently, I lead the bank's international policy engagement, and I've been fortunate to lead on our COP27 planning. And so I've been in Egypt several times this year, and I look forward to coming back in November. Having worn both hats, and as an academic and as a development professional, I know how your expertise guides the development efforts of international institutions like the World Bank Group. So that's why we're very keen as an institution to engage with you and leading academics to help address these pressing challenges. Climate change is a major threat to alleviating poverty and boosting shared prosperity. It places a major strain on economies and societies, particularly in fragile settings. By 2030, climate change could push up to 130 million people into extreme poverty. MENA countries in particular are climate change hotspots. Without urgent action to adapt, the region's economic growth will suffer and decades of development gains will be reversed. Water and food security could worsen and millions will be pushed into poverty. Here's an example of how volatile the climate change situation is in the region. Many of you who are experts on the subject know that MENA is the world's most water scarce region, and 6 out of every 10 people live in highly stressed water areas. Inhumanly high temperatures of over 50 degrees C could become the norm, and as the region gets hotter and drier, water scarcity could reduce GDP by 6 to 14% annually by 2050. Given the urgency, it's no surprise that the World Bank and our clients have prioritized addressing climate change. The World Bank is the largest multilateral funder of climate investments in developing countries. Last year, we delivered a record $31.7 billion to support countries as they address climate change. That was a 20% increase over the previous fiscal year. Our climate change support also includes technical work, such as our new diagnostic known as the Country Climate and Development Report, which outlines priority actions that will help countries to meet their climate targets and address their most pressing development challenges. The main findings from our first set of CCDRs, and we've done 20 over the past year, will be presented at COP27. Findings from all of our analytic work clearly highlight that climate and development are fundamentally connected. Countries can and must tackle both objectives together. Today, we'll share with you our Middle East and North Africa climate roadmap, which attempts to show how we want to do that. The roadmap runs from 2021 to 2025 and aims to drive climate action and a green recovery in the region. We'll also share our ambitious climate efforts in Egypt. We look forward to a really robust conversation after these presentations and hope that today's event will be the beginning of an ongoing dialogue with AUC's esteemed academic community. I thank you very much, and I now give the floor to my colleague, Federica Ranghieri.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hammer. And I'm very pleased now to invite Federica Ranghieri. Dr. Federica is the World Bank Program Leader for Egypt, Yemen, Djibouti, and she's based in Cairo. In her previous capacity at the World Bank, she was the Senior Specialist for Disaster Risk Management at the South Asia region. In that role, she co-led climate resilience projects in Sri Lanka, as well as the Afghanistan Disaster Risk Management Program, and several analytical works on multi-peril risk assessment, resettlement policies, and governance and institutional assessments in India, Sri Lanka, and Afghanistan. She managed the Learning from Mega Disasters project and was also part of the World Development Report 2015. She previously worked for the East Asia region as well as the Carbon Finance Business Unit at the World Bank. She was assistant professor at the University of Milan, where she lectured on environmental policy and environmental and social communication. So, Dr. Ranghieri, welcome to AUC and welcome to the podium for your presentation. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ramadan, President Alal, and everybody. I mean, it's really a pleasure to be here. I also have to say that I am an American University graduated, so I should really refer to that in the bio. So as Dr. Hammer explained, we are going to present in, I think, 15 minutes, the roadmap for climate change actions in the Middle East and North Africa region, as the World Bank just produced it. This is an effort that the bank does in every region, so we have roadmaps in all the regions we are operating. And this roadmap is sparkling the main priorities and the main, I would say, the key actions the bank would work on between 2021 and 2025 to increase and to enhance climate change efforts. I think, yes. So this roadmap, as said, articulates regional and country-specific transformational pathway to work on mitigation, which means build low-carbon activities and engagement, but also on adaptation, so building resilient societies while promoting social inclusive economic growth and actually trying to identify right path in each country. So you will see a regional effort, but also some specific actions per country. I don't have to go through the immense challenges that climate is bringing to MENA. I'm sure that this audience is way aware, and also Steve Armour referenced to that. So temperature is rising, actually in a way unprecedented. Precipitation variability is bringing floods and drought again in a way not predicted before, and the sea level rise is incredibly high, to the point that the Maghreb region is the fastest eroding region right after South Asia. So we have a lot of problems. But the way we try to see or to look at these challenges is also not only at the challenge per se, but also at the multiplier threats that these challenges are bringing. So we are thinking that if there's no action, and actually immediate action together with longer term, climate change will also deepen existing vulnerabilities. For example, in terms of increased poverty, where there's 132 million that might be pushed into poverty by 2030, in terms of disproportional implication of energy transition. So potentially there might be social risks in MENA because of energy transition. Climate change affect also public health and labor conditions, as it can enhance the risks born of water, airborne diseases, and because of heat extremes. It could be also an hunger multiplier. There are some areas that are already affected by famine that could, of course, increase. And of course, fragility, conflict, and violence could also be enhanced by this threat of climate change. And that would include an increase in, potentially, in migration. So the situation is complex because of climate change, but is also even more complex if we think at the threat multiplying effect of climate change. So the World Bank is trying to understand, first of all, the type of challenges and threat that we're facing, and trying to identify areas that we call of transformation that could help the countries we are serving in treating climate change. So we identified 4 main transformational areas. They're all here. So, and of course, I'm sure these are not surprising. So the first key transformation areas that needs to be prioritized is clearly about food system, water security, and resilient natural capital. I will provide you with more details in a second. The second one is about low carbon and energy transition. The third one is about climate smart cities and about resilient coastal economies. And the third one is about sustainable finance, which is also what Dr. Hammer referred to, as the bank is one of the most important financer of climate actions. So I'm really pleased that today we will discuss in depth 2 of these areas, which is the first one and the third one. And I think that we will get a lot of insight by this discussion. I'm really looking forward to this. When we talk about the first one, food system, water security, and resilient natural capital, there are several areas of attention. The first one, for example, is about promoting climate-smart agri-food systems. It includes climate-smart agricultural production. It includes reducing food loss and waste, and includes investing heavily on food security. It includes also providing technologies to strengthen farmers' adaptive capacity, and it includes also sustainable fisheries and aquaculture management. In particular, in Egypt, we are very much focusing on food security, on technology to strengthen farmers' capacities, and we are doing it through a series of analytical pieces and also some operational lending operation. The second part of this food system and water security, and et cetera, is enhance climate-sensitive water resource management. And I'm very happy that Dr. Rajesh will be in the panel today. So he will be explaining in details what is the type of engagement that we have in Egypt. Then we have the third part on this first key area, that is build resilient natural capital. This is more connected to the environmental part of the analysis. So there will be there's a focus on biodiversity losses, understanding how nature-based solution can have a positive impact in cities and also outside of cities, and increasing investments in those nature-based solutions can bring about a lot of benefits while contributing to a new way to see the environment around us. The second one, a key area of intervention, is about low carbon mobility and energy transition. There are several areas also in this case. So the first one is about promote long-term emission reduction and economic diversification strategies. This goes into a lot of the fossil fuels sectors. The second one is about scale up renewables and energy efficiency. And we have a lot of interesting intervention on this side. Also in Egypt, we have a lot of interesting intervention on renewable energies connected to water, for example. And then the last one is shifting to low carbon and resilient transport system, e-mobility, also sustainable transport, etc. The fourth area is about climate smart city, and Dr. Nada will be our champion and will discuss about this aspect in details. But this includes a lot of different aspects of resilient and low carbon cities. It goes from climate smart urban development and planning to identifying climate smart public services, and make sure that also infrastructure and services that are provided in cities are climate smart and resilient, and also a particular focus on coastal cities and coastal economies. The last one is about sustainable finance for climate action. It includes several aspects that are from greening financial systems, which means identifying the risks related to climate and identifying ways to support those risks and actually mitigate them, ways to support regulators on climate risk financing. The second one is about identifying and address transitions risk. So what happened if climate change is affecting a particular sector? What is the financial response that we can bring about? What is the insurance response that we can bring about? And then the last one is about unlocking green financing for climate smart investments, which means that we are trying to identify the financing opportunities, funds, and support the governments we are working with in identifying those and make good use of them. All of this is happening technically in 4 areas, but we see these again as cross-cutting. So we see that there is the need to have very in-depth engagement in specific sector, but we cannot forget that all these sectors are strictly combined and they are also leveraging each other. So most of these activities have sectoral perspective combined with a cross-sectoral and cross-cutting set of priorities. And these goes in several directions. So ways to, for example, increase the participation of the private sector, how to leveling the playing field with right reforms in several sectors so that the private sector can be a real partner on climate, how to promote regional integration, how to make sure that Egypt, for example, is not just one country in a fantastic region, but it's also way connected in all of the activities with the different other countries that are around here. And I can go on forever. One point that is extremely interesting to me is the one that we refer to as green skills and jobs. There is a lot of literature, I'm sure that you know this better than I do, in terms of how many jobs the climate revolution, let's call it that way, is changing. So there are jobs that are becoming obsolete, but there are apparently even more jobs that are becoming new opportunities. So investing on the new green skills and the new green jobs is extremely important in all the sectors we are working on. Country-specific action. You will see we have a lot of dots, and actually I think that we need to complete Egypt with all the dots, and I'll explain why. So these are potential opportunities that we very briefly touched upon, and these are all the countries that we account for in our Middle East and North Africa region. Most of the activities I just listed see very promising action and intervention in Egypt. I would argue with my colleagues in Washington, D.C., that we have very good opportunities also in decarbonization, for sure on the energy sector, oil and gas sectors, but also in several industrial sectors. And also we have very good opportunities in working on green budget and green asset management. And I know Dr. Nada will talk about this. So basically what we see in Egypt is really the perfect combination of all the possible activities cross-sectorally that potentially we could support the government on. What are the targets and the ambitions? So by 2025, we're very ambitious. So we would like to have 10 billion of World Bank and IFC financing in climate smart project and policy reform in MENA. This is big. And also we would like to be able to leverage another 2 billion approximately in private sector financing. So this refers to what I was saying before. So working not only focusing on the sectors and what the bank, even being the World Bank, we are just a small organization compared to the needs, right? So, but it's really important to focus not only on what we can do per sector, but really on our capacity to convene and leverage additional intervention and additional investment. And definitely referring to these potential private sectors specifically for MENA is extremely important for us. We are also trying to support actions both in adaptation and mitigation. This means that, well, ideally we would like to have a 50-50. Countries like Egypt are extremely invested in adaptation. We just had a meeting with the Minister of Environment, and she was really pushing hard on how much has been done already on climate adaptation and how much will be done. So that's priority, absolutely. But we were stressing that there are also tremendous opportunities on mitigation. So really the idea is to invest on both. And again, as I said before, trying to identify the leveraging components, trying to identify how these actions complement each other and actually are gaining even more support. In economics terms, we could say that we can gain a double or a triple dividend. One way to establish also analytically what we are trying to do is what we call these country climate and development reports. Dr. Hammer referred to that. We had extensive conversation with Dr. Ramadan on this. This is the new product that the bank, analytical product that the bank is proposing. Why it is new? Because it is the first analytical piece from a development bank that is really linking climate change and development as a one whole opportunity. So we're not seeing climate investment on one side, institutional investment on another one, developmental investment on another one, sectoral investment again on another side. So the idea is to combine all of them together and to see how climate change is an intrinsic part of development and vice versa, so that whatever pathway a country takes in their development perspective is always including and mainstreaming climate change. These reports are new. It's a big effort, I'm telling you, we're doing it. So Egypt is one of the pilot countries. So it will be one of the first country climate development report, we call it CCDR, to be presented. We are trying to launch it right before COP, and at the COP here, there will be a big event on all the CCDR that the bank is launching. So there are approximately 20 all over the world. And again, Egypt is one of them, and we have a lot of interest about this one because of COP. And then another point is about financial flows to push developed countries to really remember their Paris Agreement goal and to really push in so that, you know, all the commitments, all the pledges are respected. I'll go quick because there's a lot. Oh, one maybe, sorry. Ooh, I don't know what I did. Okay, I don't touch it. So, as I said, in particular on MENA, we are building our effort on actions and on intervention that are already happening. So we are not working in vacuum, obviously. So what we are trying to do is really to take not only note and take stock of what's happening, but really incorporate what is already happening in all the countries to be able to support them even more effectively. So, of course, we understood that a lot of countries are committed already to climate action. If you look at Egypt in particular, you all know that the nationally determined contribution have been proposed and launched, and this is an important step to take in consideration. In Egypt, there is also a very recent national climate change strategy. And there's also a lot of very important commitments to be announced at COP. So the situation where we find ourselves is clearly a very interesting turning point. Another point that we're trying to build is making sure that we have strong partnership. As I said before, the bank alone can't do this much. So it is clear that the idea of having strong partnership with all type of organization is extremely important. And this is why, once again, we welcome this opportunity to discuss with you, to have your insight, to learn from this discussion. I already touched upon this. I don't want to take any more time to the discussion. So, in summary, what is happening in Egypt and what we would like to see more of? So we're we as the bank, right now, we are trying to support the government as much as we can on the implementation of their climate change strategy, on the implementation of their NDCs. We are also supporting the NWAFI program. I'm sure you are very familiar. This program is about the nexus between water, food, and energy. We are producing what I just called the CCDR, and it's going to be a very interesting exercise. We have a lot of priorities that are coming up in adaptation and in mitigation, and also on climate finance. But we agreed that this will be the theme of another seminar that we hope to have soon, so I'm not spoiling anything about it. There is a new country partnership strategy that is coming up. This means that also the specific office of the bank in Egypt is producing a strategy on how to support the government. This strategy includes, we would say in the United States, big time, climate change. So climate change is going to be really in all the sectors, in all of the high-level objectives. So we are sort of calling this country partnership strategy a GREED country partnership strategy. And in these acronyms, we mean it's green, it's resilient, it's exclusive, it's inclusive. And what's the S? Social. Oh, whatever. Anyways, it's GREED, it's D, development. My bad, sorry. So the idea is to have a country partnership strategy that really incorporates the climate smart ideas, the green engagement, and the resilience and inclusive engagement, which is new because we always have country partnership strategy. Every 2 years or 4 years they come, and they are part of the agreement with the government, of course, because they determine our support. But this one is going to be really focusing on this aspect, which we think it's extremely important. We are developing stronger global, regional, and country-level partnership. Again, the idea is to have Egypt as part of a global set of engagement. We are supporting the COP27 presidency, as you all are doing, I'm sure. We have more than 15 specific cross-sectoral initiatives in Egypt, plus all our engagement at global level. And if you're wondering what is the global engagement at global level for the World Bank, we have 3 main messages that we are proposing at COP, and you will probably see a lot of them. And the first one is about climate and development. So again, we can't do development without really incorporating climate extensively. And then the second one is about implementation and impacts, and these resonate very well with this COP27 because it's the implementation COP, right? It's the African implementation COP. So definitely we are bringing additional messages about our global implementation to sparkle high-level impact. And the last point, but not least, is about financing, but actually financing at scale. So how the World Bank can not only contribute as the first contributor on climate finance, but can sparkle even more in the future. Let me stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ranghieri, for managing to actually give this very, very concise, but very indicative summary of the content of the report. So now we'll move to a panel discussion. So the panel discussion will have Dr. Semer Atallah from AUC as the moderator, and we'll have 2 colleagues from AUC and 2 colleagues from the World Bank that will actually contribute to the discussion. That will be moderated by Dr. Semer, and following that, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience that the panel can respond to or reflect on. So before inviting the panel to actually come on stage, I'll just very briefly introduce Dr. Semer, then Dr. Semer will be introducing each of the panelists as they actually settle on the stage. So Dr. Semer Atallah is an associate professor of economics. He is also a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute and a fellow at the Economics Research Forum. His research expertise is in political economy and development economics. His research includes game theory, applications, the political economy of democratization, and quantitative analysis of election results. He's earned his PhD and MA from McGill University in Canada an MSc in engineering from the University of California at Berkeley, and a bachelor's degree from mechanical engineering here at AUC. So, Dr. Samer, I invite you to the floor. I invite you to introduce our panelists as they actually join you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. So I'll invite the panelists to come to the panel and introduce them once. So please come, Mohammed. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Federica, for a very constructive presentation. When this report came out, I think early in 2022, and I looked at it and it was quite grim. I looked at it this morning, it was quite grim. I think you managed to put a very positive spin on it by showing more what to do rather than what's happening. So thank you for that so much. So I'm very pleased to welcome very distinguished colleagues from AUC and from the World Bank. I'll start with Rajesh Balasu Brahmyan. He's a senior water and sanitation specialist at the World Bank. He has been in the World Bank since 2013. Prior to coming to the World Bank, he's worked over 12 years in advising government, private sector, and multilateral agency on infrastructure sector. He is the team leader for Sustainable Rural Sanitation Services Program, and he was based in New Delhi before joining us in Cairo. Also welcome Dr. Muhammad Nala. We've met before. Dr. Muhammad currently is the senior urban specialist at the World Bank, and prior to joining the World Bank, he worked for the UN Habitat as the program manager for urban policies, governance and legislation program. Also welcome my colleagues. To my left, Fahad Kimaira. He's a senior manager for agriculture, the Center of Applied Research on the Environment and Sustainability Cares at AUC. He teaches sustainable development in our own program, the MSc in Sustainable Development. He has published relevant papers, integrated agricultural production system, agricultural water usage, efficiency, wastewater reuse, and salinity management, a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing today. Lastly but not least, one of our new colleagues at AUC, Sherif Gobran. He's an assistant professor of sustainable agriculture at the Department of Agriculture at the AUC. He conducts... What did I say? Agriculture.
We're friends.
Yeah. I apologize. He conducts interdisciplinary, maybe one day we'll have a Department of Agriculture. Conducts interdisciplinary sustainability, focused research on design, architecture, building engineering, and real estate finance. So we have about 45 minutes, slightly less than 45 minutes. We have lots of things to discuss. I have lots of questions to ask. I don't know where to start. The topic is gaining momentum. There is more and more discussions. This is the second event of this week at AUC on climate change. So I'm really delighted that AUC is putting this on its map and on its priority. So I'll start with you, Rajesh. We'll start with the water issues. And one of the things that related to water is the uncertainty, the challenges that come with high levels of water and low levels of water. Can you please briefly tell us what are the challenges that we face in the MENA region? What are the opportunities that we have? We've talked about desalination. What does it represent in terms of fiscal challenges to governments that are in developing countries at the MENA region? So thank you. And to all the panelists, I'll be very authoritarian when it comes to time. So.
Thank you, Dr. Samar, for that introduction and for asking a relatively easy question. I'll probably do a little bit of spoiler. I know my colleague Federica said that we will have another session on the CCDR, but talking about water, it's difficult for me not to reference to the more recent work that we've been doing on CCDR. So, and CCDR here again, just to re-emphasize, it's the Country Climate Development Report, something that is a really interesting analytics that the bank has been doing, and it's been fascinating to be a part of that. So what we really know from all the climate science is that there is definitely a secular increase in the temperature. So that's quite clear that there is warming. Now, how that's affecting precipitation is if you see the different climate models, you see a whole degree of variability in terms of some models predict excess of water and some models predict even much less of water. And we see that in our real lives. We see places which during the summer months experience extreme droughts, and in certain few months later they tend to experience excess of floods. So I think there is this challenge about understanding that in the next century, which is the century that we are in, there are going to be more extreme events with increasing frequency than what we have had in the past. And that's something that I think is fairly well recognized. So we are going to have to think about, so even MENA and specifically Egypt has had issues with flash floods happening in the coastal areas, but that's a specific event that comes and goes. So while excessive attention gets focused on some of those events, let me share one simple fact. The most of the water we all are aware in Egypt comes from the Nile. Even a 1 millimeter increase in the rainfall in the Nile basin accounts for 3 billion cubic meters of water. So you can imagine if a 1 millimeter increase in the basin is 3 billion cubic meters, then how much is the variability that could happen if there is going to be increase or reduction in the overall rainfall, and therefore its concomitant effects. So what this means is that countries will have to start increasingly looking at managing excess of water and managing too less of water at the same time. So almost being quite dynamic in the way that they think. So the first and the most important requirement there is to be sure that there is sufficient data to be able to inform and update the stakeholders, especially people who are going to be affected by this. And by that I mean early warning systems. And Egypt has invested quite well in these early warning systems, and they make sure that these warnings are available, especially on flash floods. But there can be more that countries can do when it comes to droughts, because droughts, unlike floods, is a more of a creeping kind of a shock. It's not something that's very obvious, and therefore by the time it hits, the responses may be much more lagging unless there is an early warning system for droughts. Now, linked to that, just having a warning system is not helpful. It also needs to be backed up by a response mechanism. So some countries in the world, for instance, Brazil, the moment the water level drops below a certain threshold in their dam, it automatically triggers a certain kinds of responses in terms of reduction of water to certain users, including drinking water, reduction of water for certain kinds of users, such as industries. So the next step is to think about how to operationalize these plans by having clear, identifiable steps that each of the stakeholders, both within the government and outside, can take. And the third part of this is, even after doing all of these operational plans, that we are going to be left with having to mitigate the impact on the most vulnerable, especially the poor and those who are at the forefront of the climate impact. And for that, there will be need for ensuring that there is sufficient risk mitigation. There has to be insurance and a social security scheme that is able to make sure that there is a safety net that's available for people who are impacted by it, especially, for instance, if there is a failure of water, or if water is not available, then which means if farmers are not able to plant the crops, then what kind of insurance is available for them to be able to tide over those difficult periods. I'll stop there. I know you asked me about desalination. I think that probably merits a different discussion, so I won't hog up more time, and maybe we can get to desalination.
Thank you, Rajesh. You've touched on a lot of important points, and I think you've balanced the very positive note of Federica with a lot of challenges, let's put it this way. I want to ask my colleague Fahad, the last few remarks of Rajesh touched upon on food.
Yes.
Food security. So what is it, based on your research, based on what you teach, based on what the work of the center here at AUC, what are the issues, what are the things that we can do to mitigate the challenges of water vis-a-vis food security? A country like Egypt, 105+ million,
Yes.
growing, kind of alarming.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Samir. Actually, I come from an agronomical background. We're doing research in agriculture. Dr. Rajesh was talking about the need for water to produce the food. For sure, there are some ways that do exist that we can mitigate and at the same time adapt to the current climatic conditions. However, as we know, food security is more of a multi-dimensional phenomenon. It's not only basing on the produce that you're having on the farm. Okay, so I would actually approach this in two main areas. One of them is through climate smart agriculture, the way we can actually guarantee food productivity from the agricultural perspective. We have seen our previous presenter, actually most of the topics she was talking about, they were climate smart. Before we used to have smart agriculture, you know, but with a few decades back, we changed, or the topic actually changed to climate smart agriculture. So climate smart agriculture simply is defined as the approach that helps guide actions to transform agri-food systems towards green and climate resilient practices. In that case, how do we actually implement this kind of concept in agriculture? I could go over it in two dimensions. One from the crop perspective, crop production, and at the same time from the livestock approach. We know agriculture actually contributes to greenhouse gases, but at the same time, it's a recipient. You know, it's affected by the impacts of climate change. So for cultivation land, we have some practices that we do, for example, soil management in reducing the application of synthetic fertilizers. The production chain of these chemical synthetic fertilizers, from the industrial point of view, from the raw materials, they contribute so much to the climate change, to the greenhouse gases. So if we try to do some soil management practices like conservation agriculture, like integrated food farming systems, these would help actually to reduce the application of these synthetic fertilizers. Other ways of actually mitigating and adapting through the crop production approach is also promoting low energy production systems and avoiding burning of agricultural waste. It's a very huge practice in Egypt, actually, burning agricultural waste. This waste is not actually waste. It's an asset for the farmers if they happen to understand how to do the composting in this case. Okay, and also, I will give also an idea from like us here at the AUC. There is an approach we have which also well known by some of the people. It's called the WAFE nexus, the water, energy, and food. Sometimes people call it ecosystems nexus. Okay, so these three factors, they're actually the greatest challenges that the globe is facing, and they are having intertwining effects. We can try to utilize the synergies between these different challenges. So for example, here at the AUC, we, of course, through the water, the water from the wave nexus, we desalinate water. We know that Egypt is a water-scarce country, as Mr. Rajesh actually put it, but Egypt has a huge capital of salt water, the underground brackish water, the Mediterranean water, the Red Sea water. This is an asset that Egypt can actually utilize. So we are having desalination technologies. The challenge here on desalination actually is on the intensive energy used into the system, But we are trying actually to do research on better methodologies on how we can reduce the energy consumption within these systems, okay? After producing the water from the desalination, we actually take it for aquaculture. So we don't take it straight out to agriculture. This is the integration that we are talking about. So you're trying to increase the efficiency and the productivity of this water. In traditional farming systems, when you go to areas in Egypt, sometimes people get the wastewater from aquaculture and then they actually drop it somewhere as wastewater. This is rich water that has nutrients for the crops. So you irrigate it with the crops. It's just some sort of conceptual design that can be implemented, and you do some capacity building to the farmers actually to try to facilitate these kind of interventions. I would stop there for the moment.
Thank you.
Because of time, please.
Thank you, Fahad. So this is the one area that we talked. The other area we talked about is obviously climate smart cities. So I want to shift to Muhammad Nada. There are three areas. So one of them is resilient coastal economies, climate smart public services and transportation, and climate smart urban development. It seems to me that these are for Egypt and for the MENA region where we depend a lot on how do I say this politely? Very carbon-intensive modes of planning, carbon-intensive modes of transportation. It seems that there is quite a challenge, and the roadmap puts it very nicely. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. I know that there will be a session dedicated for the CCDR, as Federica mentioned, but I'm maybe...
Spoiler alert. Sorry, I really appreciate the fact that it's called climate development. So the coupling that Stephen mentioned in the beginning, that you are really associating the word climate and development, is really spot on. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, not at all. So I'll actually, to try to address your question, I'll try to refer to another publication that we're working on at the moment, which is an Atlas for Sustainable Cities, where we basically look at the 251 cities in Egypt, almost all cities in Egypt, both old cities and new cities. And we zoom from a national perspective, looking at the map of Egypt, then zooming into each region of the 7 economic regions of Egypt, then zooming into each governorate, and then zooming into each one of the 251 cities that we have. And we try to actually ask the same question: what is happening? I think this publication itself might deserve it in its own right, another focused discussion. But what we did in this atlas is trying to see, for example, what is happening in relation to temperature, and again, a huge impact on cities. More toward the south, definitely. When we looked at sea level rising and potential impact of tsunami, again, a critical issue in many parts of the delta. Alexandria is extremely, Rosetta and Port Said. There is definitely an issue. There is, according to our estimates, somewhere between 12 to 30% of the delta might be emerged because of sea level rising by 2040. I don't want to go into the numbers. I don't want to go into the details. But very clearly, the potential impact of sea level rising and tsunami on coastal cities, especially Mediterranean cities, is significant. If I move to the Red Sea and the implication of climate change on coral reefs and livelihoods around these areas, again, and tourism industry in the Red Sea, again, a critical issue is there. So the atlas look at climate temperature as one area, and it goes deeper where temperature happen, and then it look also at the shared economic pathways scenarios, and it say, okay, what if we have scenario 1? What would be the likely impact on temperature across all cities in Egypt? And then scenario 2, 3, and so on. So that's one part of that atlas. Then we look at precipitation or rain in Egypt. And again, as mentioned by my colleagues, rain is a big issue. We are expecting less متأسف طبعا. So we are expecting less water in the north. We are expecting some increase in the southeast borders toward the area of Halayb and Shanati area, but it's not significant. So are definitely, if we look at the macro picture, we are expecting less rain, and then the implication on urban economy, on rural-urban linkages, etc., is another big issue. So as I mentioned, we're looking at one area or one challenge by challenge, and we're trying to see in that atlas what is the impact city by city. Generally, there is significant impact on assets. The loss of assets related to climate change, either significant, an immediate change if God forbid, there is a tsunami, or if there is and of course, tsunami is not related to climate change, but again, the same impact related to sea level rising can happen to tsunami. So again, when you looked at sea level rising, there is a significant impact on big parts of the city, and we identified exactly within each city which areas are more likely to be impacted. So that's one way. Loss of assets, again, in relation to asset management and increase in temperature and how it affects roads, for example, in cities, another big issues. So we looked at all of these issues, and then we end this atlas by looking at number of indicators today, or to be more specific, based on most of them on the 2017 census. And this is for the first time we present we present data on cities based on census data or other data that we were able to calculate at the city level. Usually data are at best at the governorate level. So we are looking at where are the impacts, the current situation of sustainability within the city, within cities based on 4 pillars. 1, looking at productivity within the cities. 2 is the quality of life and infrastructure. 3, the environmental sustainability. So we go into issues like how much solid waste is being collected, how much solid waste is being recycled, how much is safely disposed, etc., etc. We look at infrastructure and connectivity to infrastructure, and what is the percentage of households that have access to electricity, water, natural gas, etc., etc. So that's basic. It's at this point, this atlas is not a diagnostic or analytical work that lead into policy recommendation, but just giving you a snapshot what is the situation is in each of the cities. We also present in this atlas a map for every city, and presenting the land use maps within the cities. What is the different land use in relation to economic development? What is the land uses? And we're showing it exactly on the map. It's the master plan of the city. Where is the informal areas? Where is the CBD of the city? Where is the urban expansion areas that has been identified? And we're aiming by this tool is to help local government officials, policymakers at different levels to use this data, but to researchers, students, and researchers to use this data and try to come up with all the different analysis that they can come up with. So in some, there are significant issues in cities on temperature, on loss of assets. There is definitely issues around migration, climate refugees, if you would like to call them. We have seen this trend globally. We have seen it in MENA, and with the likelihood of increasing sea level rising, we can definitely expect a higher level of climate migration in Egypt and especially the North Africa region. If we look at the greenhouse gas footprint in Egyptian cities and in the MENA at large, compared to other regions, it's not very significant. However, if we look at especially the Gulf cities, per capita, they are definitely among the highest globally. I think this can be attributed to many things. I think you already mentioned some of them around transportation, around how the urban planning and the urban design, around building regulation, around how the building material, and the list is long, you know, of what are the things that is there that is impacting, you know, footprint and climate at the city level. I'll stop here. There is plenty to
There is plenty. That's a very good summary. There is plenty for you. Thank you, Dr. Nada. How can we, as academia, help and support this? So the exercise that Dr. Nada has presented is very much data-driven, very much science-based, very much needed in terms of guiding policy, identifying areas. I mean, the idea of the Atlas is superb, and it pinpoints basically based on different scenarios what's going to go wrong based on different assumptions. How can we help as academia in this kind of research?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Samer, for that, and quite an interesting point to jump off, I guess, on that point. I think the way I think about it is that us in academia here, higher education institutions in general, can help on the climate smart cities on three main directions. The first is actually data, big time, especially in a place like Egypt. And I'll get into the details of each. I think another very important point is skill building, green skill building. And training for future professionals for skills that are not today available in the market or for the people that recently there. And third, I mean, it's at least a hope that we can function as some sort of a fair judge with some objectivity away from short-term financials. So looking at things from a certain distance and giving feedback on that. On the data point, I think the Atlas is an amazing idea, and I'd certainly love to hear more about it. And I think overall we have a lot of data available on the global level, on the regional level, on the national level, and now we hear that there is a bit more on city level, so that's good. But we need to go on a smaller scale. At the end of the day, when we intervene in our cities, it's really at the building scale, at least for us in architecture. So how do we transition from that micro scale to the macro level is something that requires a lot of data. And I think us in academia, at least, we have the potential for that. In our case here in Egypt, I mean, we see that, again, there's a lot of published data for single case studies, this project there, this project here, but there isn't really a comprehensive database for, needed, and it certainly needs to be funded. On the skill building potential, I think climate change is a global problem, and we need a global set of skills. It requires a lot of mobility, movement of skill and exchange within the region and globally. But also, I think the idea is to, move into a practice-based type of education that feeds onto the uncertainty in a sense. We're dealing with a lot of uncertain scenarios. We don't know if it's a tsunami or just a slow level sea level rise. And we need our urban designers actually to be ready for both scenarios, right? We try to integrate this type of uncertainty a bit in our studios, asking our students, to think about future scenarios where fossil fuel is not the dominant fuel, what we will do with some of the buildings that will be left in these landscapes, like gas stations. So again, these skills are needed in that sense. And the last point, again, I go back to this objectivity. Again, especially in a place or a country like Egypt, financially, it's a volatile situation and so on, and a lot of investors are looking for short-term gains. Hopefully for academic institutions and us researchers, we might be able to take a step back from the need for this quick financial return and say, based on indices or measures, what makes sense on the long term, where we should look more, or something along these lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you. So we have 8 minutes before we jump to the question. So maybe I'll give 1 minute, a quick intervention to each. Rajesh, I'll start with you. Desalination, in 1 minute.
Okay.
A minute and a half. Okay.
Desalination should be, okay, so then I'll go with bullets then. Desalination should be considered a part of the portfolio of water resources a country has, especially in MENA. Absolutely important to consider that. Think about the fiscal impact of desalination, because it is going to be a huge cost in the way. There is a lot of talk about renewable integration, which is, I think, excellent, but we are still a long way away from 24/7 renewable for desalination. During the non-peak hours, you will still need the grid, so it will be carbon intensive, even though, and as storage solutions become more feasible, we can go towards more desalination. But most important point for desalination, as far as I'm concerned, is that if desalinated water is going to be put into a retail distribution or a city distribution network that is leaking between 20, 30, 40%, then desalination becomes a very expensive groundwater recharge scheme. You are putting water into a leaking bucket, and then that bucket leaks and goes into the groundwater. So there are much better ways of doing that, which means prioritize the physical losses that exist in the distribution system before investing very heavily on desalination. But on the whole, desalination is definitely a part of the set of solutions that the MENA countries need to move forward with.
Thank you. I think we'll revisit that along with the issue of pricing, valuing water. So that if you were to promote one project of CARES, which one would you promote today?
Thank you, Dr. Samer, for this opportunity. Actually, complementing to what Dr. Rajesh was saying, we have some projects. Of course, there are more of still adaptation and mitigation projects to climate change, but one specific project that I would promote would be the WEFE Nexus that we are working on, the water, energy, and food. Actually, recently, a few months ago, we managed to win an award from PRIMA, which is an institution of 19 countries, selected as one of the innovative research concepts that we are working on. Yes, desalination is really a big challenge, but we are managing actually to utilize all the synergies between this WEFE Nexus model. It has brine, which is the salt concentrate that you remove the water. It's a very huge challenge. Traditionally, it's actually dropped back to the sea, which affects the marine life. But in our case, we have actually some very good practices that we are doing sustainably by growing algae. We grow Artemia in this brine. And as well, for the point, our desalination that we do, actually it's aimed for agricultural production. You know, Egypt, maybe I would finish with this in 30 seconds. Egypt, for example, this year, it's producing it's expected to produce up to 10 million tons of wheat. Yet, it depends 80% on imported wheat. You know, so the country actually consumes up to 20 million tons of wheat annually, and then it's expecting to produce only 10. So where is the 10 that's going to come from? With the current conflicts in Ukraine and Russia, where the wheat is coming from. So with this concept, I believe there is much more to do and to benefit the country.
Thank you, Fahad. Muhammad, you mentioned a point that I've kind of written down. I put a lot of circles around it, the loss of assets. And it touches upon the issue of resilience, it touches upon of inclusive development. It ranks so many flags. So the loss of assets for the majority of the poor is very critical, and it has implication on their resilience, how inclusive the economy is. One general question that seems people are always asking when we talk about climate action, they say this is a first world problem. And it's just, this is not a priority. So can you touch upon that, just so that things are clearer, that this is not really an issue of advanced economies they have to worry. It's more about developing countries and the vulnerable in the developing countries and their very small assets. Thank you.
100%. Well, let me speak about Egypt. I mean, like Egypt, I think, has done a tremendous work over the last period to improve, to connect households all over the country with assets, infrastructure, etc., etc. However, I think the area that we are not looking at, which I think tie very much to the slide that Federica mentioned about the cross-cutting. And let me use this slide to make my point in relation to asset management. What is asset management? Who actually managing assets? It's a big question mark. Is it Ministry of Finance? In theory, Ministry of Finance, Chapter 2, is the one that finances asset maintenance. How asset management is happening? Who's managing assets in the country? Who's financing assets and maintenance of assets in the country? It's a big question mark. Do we have data? If you go to any governor in Egypt and ask them how many kilometers of roads do you have in your governorate? Is there a question? And I can tell you the simple answer is no. A simple information like this. So I think, the reason I think it's important to go back to the slide that Federica mentioned about, one, the whole of government approach. Do we actually have a clear policy that connect all ministries together, that set a policy of how all the relevant ministries, departments, level of government work together in relation to asset management and policy to it? I'll be cynical and say I don't think we have a very clear policy on this. If we look at finance and green finance, either to establish new assets or to maintain the existing assets, again, we have extreme shortage in finance, and we have to build new assets and as well as maintaining the existing assets. If I look at how assets are being maintained, it's usually ad hoc. Each governorate would send a request to Ministry of Finance of how much they would like to maintain their assets, and it's just negotiation without any legal, technical base of how this is being calculated. So I think there's, it's a very complex question, and but it's in 1 minute. There's issue of lack of clarity of policy on how we managing assets. 2, there is no alignment between finance needed for asset maintenance or creation of existing assets is there. 3, the measures and the standards needed for maintaining assets, it's either missing or there but not implemented. I think the HBRC, the Housing and if I speak about the urban, the Housing and Building Research Institute have done many codes related to green building, etc., etc. However, there is a significant gap between implementation and the codes.
Thank you. Sherif, you mentioned green skills and our role in academia to develop these skills for the next generation of researchers, policymakers, and leaders. A lot of these green skills are not only to architecture, a lot of it is interdisciplinary.
Of course.
And you lead a group of students that work on these. So can you touch upon that, please?
Yes, certainly. So I'll try to touch upon that in 30 seconds, and then...
I'll give you a minute also.
No, I wanted to end as well maybe with 2 key takeaways or points, so I'll touch upon that. Yeah, so I think the idea is to use academia and our institutions as space for exploration. In the real world, people will go out and they have to work jobs. It's harder to make mistakes. So I think we have a very good, student base, very creative, but sometimes they don't have that space. So basically, with the group of students that I have, with a small group, a team we call the Engaged Sustainable Futures, we just like to explore the different futures that could be possible, looking at ways to measure, looking at ways to practice, or even raise awareness through design, through research, but also through art, because I think we need that interdisciplinary space of exploration to address issues of, climate smart cities or our future in the built environment in general. But something maybe to touch upon is something that I've read a little bit on the roadmap, but I think it deserves, especially here in Egypt, a little bit of emphasis, is retrofitting. And again, I stress on our need as well in academic institutions to train our, urbanists and architects on dealing with existing building stock. We have a lot of buildings. you know, retrofitting touches upon both mitigation and adaptation. We can adapt our building stock to adapt, but we need also to retrofit it to mitigate how much carbon we're emitting and so on. So this is something very important that we have to focus on, and that we will need to build a lot of skills around. So this is one general hope I have, but maybe I'll leave with a small note that's more of a message. There's also a lot of talk about technology. Smart, when we talk about smart, we say technology. That's great, but I do hope that we don't move to think that climate change or the issue of smart climate cities or anything is a technological problem. The base of it is good design. Right? So we have to be able to design correctly and then use the technology, employ the technology to collect data, to manage, to do a lot of things. But I mean, if we design things badly and then say, okay, we'll put all these gadgets to help, you know, mitigate the issue. I mean, we've seen it happen with one plane, the 737 MAX, that didn't work out too well, right? So again, so we take that as a you know, as a simple lesson that we have to learn to design well, and then we employ the technology in its place to manage. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Sharif. We are just 3 minutes ahead of time. So, no, sorry, 3 minutes late, but that's forgivable, I believe. So I'll open the floor to questions. Maybe we'll take rounds of 3 questions. I'll ask you please to be brief in your question. I'll start with Dr. Basil and then Dr. Ali.
Thank you, everybody. This is very intriguing and actually well to the point. As Dr. Dalal said, we are venturing into this new urban studies and smart cities program. And part of what I heard today is a major issue of education about how we deal with problems and issues related to design aspects for environment, for water preservation, for efficiency, for smart cities, for what is the role of the World Bank in education? How does the World Bank infiltrate, help universities like us to really promote strongly the ideologies of the World Bank into implementation? How can we make use of them here? And specifically, some of them are graduates of AUC.
Thank you, Dr. Basil. And Dr. Ali? Just here.
Okay, I have a question and I have a comment, and I might actually ask Federica. But anyway, my first question is, when you talk about climate change, a big issue has to do with the weather swings, the temperature swings. And this is a major problem in Egypt. The weather would warm up, the plants will bloom, and then it gets cold again. And Egypt, I mean, last year we've lost many crops, and this year it's the same thing.
Yes.
Yet this is not addressed. I mean, people talk about R&D, but then R&D is a gate to exploitation because of big companies are going to come with big crops, but then you can follow the. Now, a major theme is closing the climate finance gap. A multilateral organization such as the World Bank should play a tremendous role in this kind of a thing. Now, in that I have 2 questions. First, you talk about align. I'm very interested to know, how do you climate-proof your own investments as a World Bank? I mean, I know some of the numbers, especially in fossil fuel, either directly or indirectly. Now, the other thing, which is, last week was Climate Week in New York City. And all of a sudden, in September 22nd, Al Gore was actually accusing the head of the World Bank of being a climate denier. And the reason he was doing this is that because of his alliance with Trump, who called climate change a hoax. Now, my concern about this is that this is not just Al Gore, who you could consider as an activist, who just throwing things. All of a sudden, you hear lots of people talking about the World Bank is not doing enough. The 32 billion that you talked about, we need at least 10 times more to bridge the gap. And you hear even people who are like the head of the UN climate agency saying that the World Bank has to do more, and the head has to disappear. And those all things, this turbulence actually causes, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it's going to impact, but this was just few years ago and few days ago, and it's New York Times is really spearheading this because it was a New York Times event.
Okay,
Anyway, I just wanted to.
Thank you, Ali. I'll take one more question, Dr. Laila. I would also like to engage the students in the back. They always come up with very difficult questions. So.
Thank you very much for a very informative and interesting discussion. I have a simple question. What are the expectations after COP27 in Egypt, and to what extent we're going to continue being serious about climate change? Oddly enough, maybe 30 years ago, I worked at Cairo University, and I was a student then, and I was contributing to writing a report about climate change and what Egypt is going to do in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So what has happened over the past 30 years, and what's likely to happen after COP27? Are we serious, or is it just the media and a lot of fuss we're causing without
just
real
a
need?
clarification, who you are? Who are you asking? Are you serious?
Egypt.
Okay. So
Egypt. Egyptians.
I wish I could speak on behalf of Egypt, but
All
I
right.
don't. So I think, Federica, do you mind taking these couple of questions? So if one of the colleagues with the mics can give the mic. So there's a question about the role of the World Bank into education, the bridging the climate finance. How do you climate proof? This is a very important question. And if you want to address the
Elephant in the room?
The elephant in the room.
Yes. I'll try to respond quickly, but I'm sure that my colleague will complement and add. I think it's a great question about what the bank is doing for universities, for students, for young people. It's not necessarily the objective of the bank to work with the young people. So we have our main client is clearly our governments, but we have a lot of initiatives. So for example, since we are talking about climate change, we have a big initiatives with the youth groups at COP. It has been through several COPs. We have climate change and youth. And these are catalyzer, we call them. So we attract new ideas, we discuss new ideas, we try to be helpful. But I'm sure we could do more. So these initiatives to us is one option to actually have better contact with the student, engage them even more, and hopefully maybe do even something together. So there's a lot of openness in some countries. We have specific program. For example, I remember a couple of countries in South Asia where we have specific contributed to university courses. So with like a degree in climate change and disaster risk management that happened in a couple of countries in South Asia. So this is something that the bank could do, but it's not really our main goal. In terms of, all the talking about the New York Times, etc., this has been, the president, our president, the IMF, also secretary, they have all been involved in a lot of talks about climate change. I don't think that whatever the president came out with came exactly what he meant. The bank has really been engaging a lot on climate change and a lot on several different sectors and a lot on finance. So I believe that it has way more to say and to promote than what appeared out of that conversation. We still believe that we are in numbers, that's a fact, the biggest investor. But the idea is that the bank will not be the only investor. And as I said before, I hope it was, at least I was clear enough, the idea of the bank is really to convene and multiply. So we are really trying to do our best to levering the playing field so that the private sector could really contribute. Other organizations could contribute. And we also provide help and support to build the reforms in each countries that are needed to attract more finance on climate. I hope it answers at least a little bit.
If I can just come in on the point that Federica made on the finance. I do strongly believe that if you actually were to take all the development finance that's available, I mean, if you put all of World Bank and ADB and all of them, and you look at the requirements on the other side, neither the development community plus the governments from their own fiscal will be able to meet that. So you clearly need the private sector in the table. And that is where the problem has been, and that's rightly so, because the private sector comes in when the risk is mitigated and the investments are de-risked, and there is a reasonable degree of return. Of course, there are social investment funds and other kinds of funds which have a slightly lower threshold, but ultimately there has to be a return. And that is where I think institutions like the bank and even other multilaterals and other IFIs and even, let's say, some of the large insurance firms and the development institutions can play a role. It's not necessarily how much they lend, but actually what kind of structures are they able to put in place that is able to de-risk investments and to mobilize the private sector. And I think that is where, if I see myself being in the bank for the last 10 years, there's been a considerable shift where earlier, when we used to look at a project, we used to, the first question we would ask is about all the economic analysis and whether this project is needed and all that. But now the first question that is asked is this something that can be done by the private sector? If it is, then what is it that we need to do to make that happen rather than to make that as a lending, I mean, the lending that the bank does. So in a way, increasingly, the threshold is stronger, is much higher for us to make sure that the investments that we are making are those that are the ones that cannot be made by the private sector. Because if they can be, then we have to enable the environment to be able to make that.
Very important point. Yeah, sure.
On the first question around the relationship between the bank and academia, well, definitely we can do more. I would hope we can do more. You know, it's very difficult, as Federica mentioned, but we can definitely do more. But I can just give some examples of what already we are doing with that. For example, I gave an example of the Atlas. And actually this Atlas, there is 20 students has been helping in producing it from Cairo University and Shams University and Alexandria University. So that's one way, you know, we really enjoy and appreciate whenever possible to engage students. So that's one. Two, I was really honored to come to give lectures, you know, in Dr. Laila's under Dr. Laila's program, for example, or Dr. Hania Shulkumani. Several, you know, whenever we are requested to present and share, we are always there to do that.
Actually, if you don't mind, Dr. Bassel, I'm gonna revert your question and ask my colleagues from AUC, what do you want from the World Bank?
Yeah. Very interesting. I was hoping that you would ask.
Your wish is my command. Go for it.
Yeah, I think looking at Africa, with these low or developing countries, to be honest, when you look at their annual budgets from the governments, research always takes like the smallest portion of the annual budget, you know, which actually I do believe that there is need to increase budgets in research. However, someone would also ask, if you do research and you fail to disseminate it to the right people, then what's the point of actually funding this research? I'll give an example. Here at the AUC, I work at one center which is led by Dr. Hannes Willem, the current Minister for Water Resources. What we do is that we try to get grants, of course with sponsorship and funding from the university, as well as external grants. When we get these grants, we go to the communities. We do assessments and evaluation. We talk to the people, the right audience, and we get to know what are the mega challenges that actually they are facing. With these challenges, we come and we remodify or recreate and develop our research plans. We don't do it the other way around. They are the people that we are trying to find solutions for. So to do this, still you need some grants. I think the World Bank, what it can do, even though our colleague Federica said that she deals more with the governments and stuff like that, I think there is a need to somehow go down to academia to fund the research. I think it's quite very important.
Thank you, Fahd. Sharif, do you have wish list?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if I wasn't necessarily prepared to make a business proposition, but let's say, I think, I mean, not to revert back the question, but I think, again, coming back to the point of data, you need data for impact assessment. Maybe this is where you should put out calls for contributions from us. Of course, I mean, you will have to pay some money for that, but you know, that's understandable. But again, the hope is that we want to know what data you need to make better impact assessment, especially on the micro scale or kind of on the scaling, and we would be happy to help. I mean, it builds you know, a good foundation and the skills of the students that we work with. So
thank you, Sharif. Dr. Laila's question, I'm going to narrow down your question to AUC, and I'm going to revert the question to Adham, who asked who is the climate change AUC climate change champion. So what after COP27? It's not a difficult question.
No, it's not a difficult question. So we've talked about it too. So for those community members, we've heard this before. We'll repeat this. I mean, the climate change initiative at AUC is something that really, as the president pointed out, is all, even though it was launched only last academic year, it's based on activities and expertise that has been accumulating at AUC for decades. And with a combination of support, financial, logistical, etc., the aim is to really continue on encouraging faculty members, faculty colleagues, students in climate action beyond COP27. Well beyond, not this year, but continuously. It's something that, you know, the president and the provost have also are supporting very much. It's something that will be on the agenda of the university, I think, for the coming decade or so as climate action. And the sort of different opportunities and mechanisms that we are putting in place and will continue to put in place is to really focus or encourage people, colleagues at AUC, to engage in multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work. That's the only way to really address climate challenges. Between faculty, staff, students, and universities putting some funding into that. But we're also seeking external funding to support and partnerships to support us in that. So it's something that will continue. And I think we've started the Office of Communications, again, I've mentioned yesterday, are doing a fantastic job in supporting us in that. It's also our ability to disseminate what we do, you know, results that we reach, methodologies that we adopt or we develop. This is something that we really need to share more. With other academic institutions in Egypt, but also other partners. And this is, you know, the small bit that we can sort of do, you know, show what other entities can do in Egypt. And we're hoping that it would be, or we know that it will be effective, and we're hoping it will be long-lasting.
Thank you. I think Rajesh wanted to address that also after COP.
Yeah, so over the last year, we've had, at least I've had the opportunity of following up on a lot of initiatives that Egypt has started. So I'm actually quite hopeful. The reason being, many of these are putting in place the kind of institutional arrangements and mechanisms that should continue well beyond the COP. For instance, the National Climate Change Strategy and how the National Climate Change Council is following up on the specific actions and how the strategy is being rolled down to different ministries so that they need to coordinate from their side on achieving the specific targets and objectives that are set up. So while the COP definitely gathers a lot of attention and it is a big event, but the way that I see it is that there are already a lot of efforts underway, starting from last year, even things relating to modernizing the irrigation system by introduction of drip irrigation through a fairly substantial program that has been underway well before the COP had started. And I see many of those initiatives, including the promotion towards e-vehicles and electric vehicles and going towards a less carbon intensive future, continuing beyond the COP. But if the COP can act as a trigger to fast forward us into some of those directions, then I think it'll be a step in the right direction.
Thank you. I'm going to take another round of questions. I'm going to be biased towards the students. So yes, the lady in the back. Thank you.
If a student were to conduct research on sustainable development and it actually made a difference, that would add a difference. Can students reach the government, like the research they conducted reach the government?
I'm not sure, you were dropping off. So the research that you have done, can it be?
I didn't do research. No. I'm just asking if a student were to make research about climate change and it would find
have an impact.
Sustainable solution, would it reach the government?
Very good question. Any other questions from the students? So Dr. Angie first, yeah.
Hello. Okay, yeah. I mean, the matter is of criticality. I mean, from hearing you out, and it is really a critical matter. The thing is, what I feel is like we're running everywhere, everybody's running, and but do we really have a direction? And who's taking charge, and who should take charge? Who should be in the upfront and who should follow? And should we have a strategy focused on one area followed by other areas? Or should we just disseminate where everybody's going, but really we're just like shooting things in the air and we're not sure about? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? The gentleman, yeah.
Hi. So I think my question is, I mean, listening to the conversations that are being made and also watching the presentation. Well, first, I'm a graduate student doing migration studies, but a lot of times, at least when it comes to climate action, something that I always kind of think about is what I don't really see is the individual level. Like, for example, I just spent a summer in Germany doing research, and I just noticed how much everyone is more attentive to climate change, and even everyone is recycling, everyone is talking about it, and even party politics is focused around climate change, which is something I don't really see in my country, Tunisia, or here in Egypt. And even us students, and I mean, some of us are sometimes even not aware of the simple things. You know, some of us waste energy, waste water. So I think, I mean, from the conversations I've been listening to, sometimes it gets too technical and scientific, where is the focus on the individual level? What else can be done to kind of raise more awareness, to kind of at least maybe build more prepared individuals to help in tackling the issue? Thank you.
Very good question. So the question about students' research, I'll take the liberty. Do you want to address that? Yes, sure. Please.
Yeah, I'll take the liberty to maybe address that quickly for you. I think, yes, I mean, potentially you could. Just as an example, we have a lot of projects that we've been working on that are going to be, kind of presented at COP. And they're student projects. These are students that led them and did the research, and it's out there, and we're going to encourage them to go there and talk about it, hopefully reaching governments, not only in Egypt, globally. So yes, there are opportunities, but also I think as a maybe an advice, I'm not necessarily sure I'm the best person in the room to give that, but maybe just focus on doing a research that you like, do it well, put it out, and then opportunities for engaging the right stakeholders will come by, right? But just focus on doing your research very well. That's the key, maybe.
Yeah, actually, I was a student and I'm still a student, but I would just share something that the past 12 years, I was in the medicine academic career. you know. And after some time, I quit from medicine to agriculture. Yani, I grew up from a farmhouse, and then my mom was like, you need to be a doctor, you know. And then I went to the medical school, you know. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel like this is what I want. This is what Dr. Sharif was talking about. You need to do something that will keep you rolling, you know. I did agriculture, I graduated, I did masters, I did so on. So I think it's really very important that you do something that you like, you know. And secondly, I think it's also very much important that you try to find the best place where to do your research from. I would say, for example, in the university here, there are so many areas where you can do, so many departments where you can do climate change-related research. In the SSE and other departments, for sure, we have students in the SSE under CARES unit. You know, they are doing a lot of thesis research related to climate change. You know, there is a project we are doing in Mas Alam. It's a nature-based solution to climate change. You know, we are in Mas Alam in the coast areas. We are actually aiming to plant up to 500 acres of mangroves. This is a nature-based solution to climate change, and students are getting involved. You know, so within the campus, outside the campus, I think you just have to find the right place for this. Thank you.
You want to comment on that?
No, not on this, but on what our young friend said. And I think that's probably the most important thing that we are missing, I would say, in most of our countries, is the power of the individual action.
Yes.
I mean, we don't recognize that each individual action matters, and therefore, what I would urge everyone is, please do continue your individual action. Each one of us needs to be conscious about every individual action that we take, because it matters. We may not recognize it, we may not realize how much, but it does matter, because it is that which ultimately will cause any kind of systematic change in the behavior and attitudes of the larger community. So please do continue to focus on it, even if you don't see the immediate result.
Thank you. Actually, as a microeconomist, I believe the macro is an aggregation of micro. So I always tell my kids, you know, you start by yourself, regardless of. I really appreciate your question. I think that the point of what do we do on the individual level, on the household level, is very, very critical. There was a question from Dr. Zahir about, I mean, the presentation is overwhelming. There is a lot of things, right, left, and center. And I think that the choice of the word roadmap is kind of streamlining things. So do you want to address the question of Dr. Zahir about where do we go from here?
Well, I would start actually with
the mic, please.
Thanks. Well, if I look at Egypt, you know, already the government has endorsed the strategy Egypt 2050 for climate change. And I think, but if you want my opinion, if this kept at this level, then that is not what we need. I think we need to take this strategy, and every one of us, be it local government, be it sectoral ministries, be it academia, seeing where we fit. You know, this strategy have 5 pillars: looking at mitigation, adaptation, institutional governance, green finance, and research. So I think each one of us, each agency, actor, NGO, etc., need to see where they fit in this strategy, how they can contribute to it. In a complex problem, it gets messy, it gets difficult, but I think it's our collective effort that we need to, each one of us, try to see where we fit in. For example, what we are trying to do in the bank, we are working on Alexandria Governorate, and we are zooming into that city and seeing how Alexandria can contribute to this national strategy. So on mitigation, what exactly they are doing, adaptation, etc., on the 5 pillars that I have mentioned. And what was, you know, maybe this also would tie to what Dr. Laila mentioned previously, her question. What was really pleasantly surprising is the governor himself. I was really astonished to see someone who's like really climate aware, and he's a real advocate for climate change and what needs to be done on it. And then already there has been investments on the last few years that are actually looking at both mitigation side and the adaptation side. So there's already things happening. I think what we need to all do is to try to push it and strengthen it more and more. if you would allow me just a few seconds on the question from the colleague from Tunisia, I completely agree with him. And I remember COP15, actually it happened in Copenhagen. And what they did at that time is they organized an initiative called the WW Views on Climate Change. It's basically citizen views on climate change. And I was honored to be the facilitator of that view 14, 15 years ago in Egypt, bringing 200 citizens and listening from them how they view climate change and its impact. I think the methodology is there, the paper is there, and I think maybe the AUC can do something like this, where we look at Cairo, we look at Alexandria, we look at number of cities, and we listen to people, document it, and then maybe we can come up in the COP, in the green zone or the blue zone or whatever we can, and present what are the voices of Egyptian, what are the voices of young people in relation to climate change.
I think this is your next research project. Do you want to address the question of where to start from and what are the things? What if you were now the Prime Minister of Egypt? Which one do you start with? Of country X, let's put it this way.
I'm happy I'm not. So I think it's a really tough decision because there are trade-offs and choices to be made. I mean, how much do you put on one vis-a-vis the other? For instance, how much to invest in mitigation and how much to invest in adaptation, because you do have to manage both as you go along. So I think having looked at the goals and as what Mohammed Nada said, I think the strategy is out there. I think what I do feel is that there is a need to cascade it down to the lowest level functionary, which perhaps doesn't happen as efficiently, so that each one of us is kind of left with a uncertainty around what is my role in this or how do I contribute. And that is, I think, where the problem really lies. So it is the inability to cascade it down. Perhaps we have too many of these strategies. So maybe there is a need to integrate them and to, I won't say come up with one more strategy, but have at least some kind of cascading of these so that the individuals, right, institutions are able to identify what role they have and how that fits into the big picture.
That's another validation that microeconomics is more important than macroeconomics. I'll take another round of questions. Again, I'll be biased to the students. Yeah.
Hi, I just want to say I really loved the discussion, but I also wanted to ask two small questions. Prior to entering this conference, I had no idea of what was happening and everything, and unfortunately, not a lot of people are fortunate enough to have this privilege. And so I wanted to know, as an ordinary, average Egyptian person, how can one educate themselves about it? Because it's very easy to say, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, but are there resources, are there campaigns, initiatives that can help a person understand what is really going on? And also another thing is, as a person who's very passionate about climate change and all that, are there women experts or women who are, involved in it? Because, I would have loved to see women too on the panel. I would have loved to see, different perspectives and everything. So, yeah, these are my questions.
Two spots on. Another question. So there's a question about the awareness and, yeah, okay. The two gentlemen in the back.
So when I was listening to the presentation from the slideshow, there was a part that mentioned scaling up renewable energies and energy efficiency. So my question would be, how would you scale up, let's say, wind power or solar energy?
Okay, good.
Am I speaking next?
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of the solutions today discussed are economic and within a single nation, but I think we're seeing today that we're living in a very geopolitically volatile situation around the world. We're seeing how energy policy in Europe can be affected by an invasion. We're seeing how agricultural policy in Sri Lanka and the Netherlands can affect the internal political situation. So how do we navigate climate solutions at these conferences when the certainty of which the governments that are discussing like, will these states still be around in the same situation in 50 years to meet these goals that are being discussed at these conferences?
Super important questions. They're super difficult, so I don't know which one do you want to start. So do you want to, I don't know, it's not your area, but do you want to address the scaling up of energy? I know, maybe, do you want to take that? I don't know, it's up to you, it's one of the areas.
So no, I think it's a really, really tough question, right? Because and it is a very technical issue. Like, if you keep increasing the capacity of your solar and wind, I mean, they're going to do well when the conditions are right, but it's not going to be able to make the grid stable. So there is a trade-off to be made between the different sources of energy in terms of, I mean, the way that I would like to look at this problem would be to look at it as a combination of the stability of the source vis-a-vis the carbon intensity of the source. And it's almost like, I mean, if some of us have done finance, we understand the portfolio theory, right? I mean, which is the risk versus return of a specific asset. So there has to be some kind of an approach which balances that, because otherwise going 100% into a renewable, unless the technology is there to be able to do storage in a way that it can meet the demands for throughout the day, may not be feasible. But we are sitting today not knowing what will happen 10 years from now. Like if I take the example of desalination, the membrane costs came down 80% in the last 10, 15 years. So technology is progressing much faster than any of us would have can actually project it. So maybe there are going to be solutions 10 years down the line that are going to make wind much more stable than what it is today. So and that's what makes these investments really difficult, because you don't want to make an investment and then ended up stranded with an asset 5 years down the line when the technology has gone ahead. So
thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not answered the solution,
No, but
the question, but thrown in more questions.
Just the question of the young lady about how do we go to the awareness of the average person who is not privileged enough to be sitting here.
It's a difficult question. You know, I think it's a shared responsibility. I think this institution, the bank has a role, the universities has a role, the NGOs definitely. I myself, you know, if I speak me as an individual, the first time I heard about climate change and its implication was 20 years ago when I was working in an NGO as a volunteer. It was not, my work was not related to climate change per se, it was about environment and biodiversity, but once you get immersed to any of these topics, then you start to see the wider picture and the implication. So my immediate pragmatic suggestion is get involved in any topic. You were in medicine and then you shifted to agriculture. I'm a veterinarian.
Okay.
So just jump, try, work, and I can tell you all the paths would lead to each other, and we are there. If there's anything that we can help on an individual level, as an institution, we will definitely be there to help.
I wanted also to complement something that actually I did my Masters of Sustainable Development here, because we are talking about individual level. I didn't know that, okay, you need to tap this small thing called a water tap when you're brushing your teeth. To tap it and you close the water and then you continue brushing, and after you open it to wash it, you know. After doing the studying, I knew, okay, I was actually wasting water, you know. So I think also another example, we go to the communities, we talk to the people. For example, in one of our projects of having mangroves established down in the Red Sea, we were talking to the people and the farmers were like, what's in for me? You know, you want me to plant trees? These are not edible trees. So we have to find ways on how we have a win-win situation still for these local people. You know, we have communities where we go teaching them in capacity building about efficient ways of using agricultural water, you know. And then the guy is like, okay, I do flood irrigation, I don't need anything. I just open the canal and water goes through. So you're telling me to to finance drip or sprinkler irrigation or something like that. So I think awareness is much more important for people really to understand the benefits of these interventions.
Thank you, Federica, I'm going to give you the question on no, I'll address the women question, I'll address it. But on the geopolitical uncertainty, it's not super hard.
No,
we don't know. That's the best answer you can say.
I have a solution. No, thank you for the question. It's actually a very good way to ground this conversation, because we can talk as much as we want about one particular country, one particular sector, one particular city. But clearly everything is affected by the global agenda. I don't have an answer on that. Seriously, I don't. I wish I had. What we're trying to do is really to work as much as possible in a cohesive way, which means, first of all, the World Bank, in our case, I'm talking about my organization at this point, it's a global entity, okay? So we are working all the time regionally, cross-sectorally, and we are trying to bring all the perspective in that. And I think that helps us, in a way, considering all different perspectives. We are also trying to work vertically. So from the very top of our organization, from the government to the national government, to the local government, to the citizens. So trying to see all the perspective. That's the best we can do to incorporate all these different entities and all these different threats, if you wish. But it's very difficult to have an answer on that. Actually, I think that you might have a good answer to, from an academic perspective, to help us out how to do it. And then on the woman, just let me do that. Just 1 second. Okay. I am a woman.
Yes,
okay?
exactly. Just in case. Just in case.
Okay. Just to say. And then just a very quick one.
Sure, go ahead.
If I look at the bank, our global director for climate change is a woman. Our VP for sustainable development, our regional director for sustainable development is a woman. The head of the IMF, and she's absolutely keen on having climate change as a very important part of her job, is a woman. So these are just examples, but I mean,
and the head of World Bank in India, in Egypt is a woman.
Egypt is a woman. Our country director is a woman. So I mean,
as statistician, we say that the panel is not a representative sample of women engagement in climate change. and I want to point out, if you want to look at female colleagues who work on climate change, I want to point to my colleague Nouri Thar, who's joining MENA project on alternative modes of transportation and the impact of climate change. I apologize that this panel is not gender representative. And just to conclude, I mean, I was asked to wrap up, but I think your question is an excellent way to wrap up, because climate development inclusiveness also include gender and female inclusiveness. Thank you so much, distinguished panelists, for very constructive, very sobering panel. Thank you so much, President Dalal. Thank you so much, Professor Abdurrahman. Thank you so much.
So your tummy's in, and everybody needs to look smart and slim. Yeah. So no, I mean, no. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. We'd like to extend our deep thanks for the World Bank colleagues that have joined us today for their very insightful presentation, but also the points of discussion at the panel. We also would like to thank our AUC colleagues for their valuable contribution. And as we finish the photo shooting, people can actually, we have a small reception outside on the terrace for people to actually maybe informally intermingle and chat to World Bank colleagues, guests, and the president and the provost. So join us at the terrace for a short reception with refreshments.